Good evening, night dwellers, and welcome back to the Dark Chronicles, where the shadows come alive and the unknown whispers its secrets. I'm your host, Mr. Dark, and tonight we're venturing into a tale that's not just chilling, it's hauntingly unforgettable. Picture this: a group of friends, a small town carnival, and a haunted attraction unlike anything you've ever imagined. A place where fear isn't just a feeling, it's a currency. What started as a thrill-seeking adventure for these 5 friends turned into a descent into madness, terror, and a darkness that refuses to let go. Only 3 survived to tell the tale. But the real question is, did they truly escape? Sit back, turn down the lights, and brace yourself. Because once you step into the haunted manor, there's no turning back. The gravelly voice of the podcast host filled the airwaves, blending with the static hum of a late-night broadcast. Welcome back, folks, to Tales from the Shadows, where we delve into the scariest, spine-chilling stories from across the country. Tonight's tale, it's not for the faint of heart. It's about a group of friends, a local carnival, and one of the most infamous haunted attractions in America, the Haunted Manor. The host paused, letting the suspense simmer, then continued. Imagine this: a small town carnival that pops up once a year in Brookhaven, a sleepy town in the Midwest. It's the kind of place where summer smells like caramel apples and roasted peanuts, and the autumn air carries the faint scent of burning wood. But this carnival is different. There's one attraction that's earned it a notorious reputation. They call it the Haunted Manor. Step inside, they say, and if you can make it through without screaming, flinching, or running out, you'll win a grand prize, $10,000. The host chuckled darkly. Sounds simple, right? But year after year, no one ever claims the prize. Some say it's the intricate design, the terrifying actors, or the sheer psychological manipulation that makes it impossible to endure. Others, well, they believe it's something darker, something supernatural. The voice deepened, growing more ominous. Tonight's story isn't just about the manor's frightening tricks. It's about what happened to a group of 5 friends who dared to test their courage. Only one of them walked out, and she's the one who told me this story. The Brookhaven Carnival opened every October, just as the first leaves began to fall. It wasn't massive like the ones in cities, but had its charm. Bright Ferris wheel lights twinkling against a starless sky, booths with ring-toss games, and stalls serving fried food dripping with grease. Families came for the laughter, but thrill-seekers came for the Haunted Manor. On that crisp October evening, 5 college friends stood near the ticket counter. Sean, the self-assured leader of the group, with a permanent smirk on his face. Rachel, the fiery redhead whose sharp wit masked a secret love of danger. Mike, the cautious thinker, often the group's voice of reason. Alice, shy and soft-spoken, whose pale face reflected her unease with the entire idea. And finally Tyler, the joker of the group, always cracking jokes but harboring a fear of the unknown. "Are you serious about this, Sean?" Alice asked, her voice barely audible over the distant carnival music. "This place gives me the creeps." "Come on, Alice," Sean said, throwing his arm around her shoulders. "You're not going to let a little spooky decor scare you, are you? It's all fake. Just actors and props. Easy money." Mike raised an eyebrow. "If it's so easy, how come no one's won the 10 grand? "Because people are weak," Sean shot back, flashing a grin. "But not us. We're different." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Look, if you're scared, Alice, you can wait outside, but I'm not passing up the chance to prove I've got guts, unlike some people." Her gaze darted teasingly to Tyler, who faked a shudder. Sure, Tyler quipped, his voice shaky. "You're the brave one. I'm just here for moral support, and maybe to scream my lungs out." Mike adjusted his glasses. "This place does have a reputation, though. I read online that it's more than just actors. People claim weird stuff happens here, like things they can't explain. Oh, please, Sean exclaimed, laughing. Don't tell me you believe that crap, Mike. Ghosts, curses, it's all marketing. They want us to think it's real so we get scared and back out. I bet they've got cameras hidden everywhere, just waiting to film us looking stupid. Alice tugged her sweater tightly around her. I still don't think we should go. There's something wrong about this place. $10,000, Sean said firmly, holding up the promotional flyer he'd snagged from a nearby booth. The bold blood-red letters read, "Enter the haunted manor. Survive the terror. Win $10,000. Dare to try." Sean waved it in front of Alice. Imagine what you could do with that kind of money. Pay off tuition, buy a new car. Alice looked away, biting her lip, but didn't protest further. Tyler nudged her. "Hey, don't worry. If anything happens, I'll protect you. Or, hide behind you." The group shared a laugh, but the sound felt hollow against the backdrop of the manor looming in the distance. Its towering facade was a patchwork of rotting wood and peeling paint, illuminated by dim, flickering lights. Sinister gargoyle statues flanked the entrance, their mouths twisted into mocking grins. A tall figure emerged from the shadows by the manor's door. He was dressed in a tattered Victorian coat, his face concealed by a pale, cracked mask. His voice was a low rasp as he called out, "5 tickets for the brave? Step forward, if you dare." Sean didn't hesitate, striding up to the man and slapping cash onto the counter. "We're in." The masked figure's head tilted unnaturally, his hollow eyes seeming to pierce through Sean. Bravery is admirable, but foolishness... He let the word hang, his gloved hand gesturing toward the dark doorway behind him. "Good luck. You'll need it." As the group crossed the threshold, the heavy doors creaked shut behind them with a finality that made Alice's heart sink. The last thing they heard before the darkness enveloped them was the figure's chilling laughter. "Welcome," his voice echoed, "to the haunted manor." The air inside the haunted manor was thick and musty, carrying the sharp tang of mildew and something metallic, almost like blood. The faint glow of lanterns on rusted chains barely lit the narrow hallway ahead, casting long, shifting shadows on the cracked walls. The door behind them had slammed shut with a booming finality, cutting off the comforting sounds of the carnival outside. For a moment, no one moved. Rachel broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Well, this is cozy. It looks like they spent their entire budget on a cheap Halloween store vibe." "Yeah," Sean agreed, taking a step forward and turning to face the group. "It's all for show. They want us to freak out, but it's just clever lighting and sound effects. Right, Alice?" Alice didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the long hallway ahead, where a single door stood slightly ajar, swaying as if nudged by an invisible hand. She felt the icy grip of dread coil around her stomach. Tyler sidled up beside her, lowering his voice to a mock whisper. "Relax, Alice. It's not like we're going to get eaten alive by ghosts or anything. Worst case, we run into a dude in a rubber mask, we scream a little and I cry, just to make you all feel better about yourselves." "Don't overthink it," Mike added, his voice calm but cautious. "This whole place is designed to mess with us. It's psychological. They study common fears and play on them. Darkness, isolation, maybe some creepy dolls. None of it's real." "Exactly," Sean chimed in, rubbing his hands together. "And that's how we're going to win. We keep our heads, play along, and when they realize they can't break us, we walk out with 10 grand. Rachel arched an eyebrow. "Oh, you're so sure, huh? How about we make it interesting?" Sean grinned. "What do you have in mind?" Rachel smirked, crossing her arms. "A bet. Whoever screams or freaks out first buys everyone dinner for a week." And none of that fast food crap either. I'm talking steak dinners. I'm in, Sean said without hesitation. Not that I'll be paying. Same, Tyler chimed in, though his voice lacked confidence. Steak sounds great. Maybe I'll scream on purpose if it gets me free food. Mike adjusted his glasses. Fine, but let's establish ground rules. What counts as freaking out? A scream, running out, or cowering like a baby? Rachel cut in. That includes hiding behind someone else. Sorry, Tyler. Noted, Tyler said with a mock salute. Guess you'll all be paying for my lobster. Alice shook her head. This is stupid. Let's just get through it and leave. Sean leaned in, lowering his voice. What's the matter, Alice? Afraid you're gonna lose? She met his gaze, her jaw tightening. Fine, I'm in. Sean clapped his hands together. That's the spirit. Now, let's do this. The group moved cautiously down the hallway, their footsteps echoing eerily against the warped wooden floor. Tyler took the rear, casting nervous glances over his shoulder every few seconds. Rachel led the way, pushing open the swaying door with a flourish. Beyond the door was a room unlike anything they'd expected. The floor was made of dark, polished wood, reflecting the faint red glow of lanterns strung across the ceiling. In the center of the room stood a circular table draped in black velvet. Around it were 5 high-backed chairs, their upholstery cracked and faded. This feels off, Alice murmured, eyeing the chairs warily. Welcome, travelers, a deep, disembodied voice boomed from nowhere, making everyone jump. Tyler instinctively grabbed Alice's arm, earning a glare from her. Please, have a seat. What is this? Dinner theater, Rachel quipped, masking her unease with bravado. Do we get wine with the meal? Sean chuckled, pulling out one of the chairs and sitting down. It's a gimmick. They're trying to set the mood. Let's just play along. One by one, the others took their seats, though Alice hesitated before reluctantly sitting between Tyler and Mike. As soon as she did, the room darkened. The lantern's red glow dimmed until only a faint pulsing light remained. The voice returned, softer this time but no less ominous. Do you believe in fear? Sean smirked. Not really. The voice chuckled, a low guttural sound that sent a shiver through the room. Fear believes in you. At that moment, the table began to spin, slowly at first, then faster. The chairs groaned under their weight, and the faint hum of unseen machinery filled the air. The room seemed to tilt, as if the floor were shifting beneath them. A metallic, sulfuric smell wafted up from somewhere below. Is this supposed to scare us? Rachel shouted over the noise. Nice try, but I've seen scarier stuff on Netflix. Then, with a jarring screech, the spinning stopped. The chairs slid back on their own, forcing the group to stand. The voice spoke again, this time with a sinister edge. Proceed if you dare. The Manor welcomes you to face what lies within. The door ahead creaked open, revealing another long hallway. This one was darker, the flickering lanterns replaced by faint glowing runes etched into the walls. Okay, that's actually kinda cool, Mike admitted, stepping forward to examine the markings. These symbols, they look like Old Norse runes. Yeah? Well, maybe we'll find Thor at the end of this, Tyler said nervously. Or Loki. He's more my vibe. Sean strode confidently ahead. Let's keep moving. We're wasting time. The group followed, their banter quieter now, as an unspoken tension settled over them. As they walked deeper into the manor, the air grew colder, and the faint sound of whispers began to echo around them. Do you hear that? Alice whispered, clutching her sweater tightly. Hear what? Sean asked, glancing back. The voices, she said, her voice trembling. They're coming from the walls. Mike stopped, tilting his head. I hear them too. It's like they're calling to us. Probably speakers hidden in the walls, Sean said dismissively. "It's all part of the act. Don't fall for it." But as they continued down the hallway, the whispers grew louder, and the runes on the walls began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. The group slowed, their footsteps hesitant. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Rachel admitted, her bravado faltering. Tyler nodded. "Yup, I'll take my steak to go, please." Sean turned to face them, his grin forced but unwavering. "Guys, relax, we're fine. It's just a haunted house, smoke and mirrors." But even he couldn't hide the flicker of unease in his eyes as the next door creaked open, beckoning them into the shadows beyond. The next door swung open, releasing a low groan that echoed into the darkness. Beyond it lay a staircase spiraling downward, shrouded in shadows. A faint mist clung to the steps, curling upward as though alive. The glow of the runes from the hallway cast an eerie light on the jagged, uneven stone walls, making it hard to tell where the steps led, or if they had an end at all. "Nope," Tyler said, backing up. "Hard pass. Stairs are how horror movies start. You go down and you don't come back up." "Don't be a baby," Sean said, rolling his eyes. "It's just stairs. They probably lead to some kind of basement set. Classic haunted house design." "You first, then," Rachel challenged, crossing her arms. "Gladly," Sean replied, taking the lead. He placed one foot on the first step, testing it. The stone was damp but solid beneath his sneaker. With exaggerated confidence, he began descending. "See? Totally safe. Just watch your step." One by one, the others followed. Alice hesitated at the top, staring into the gloom. The mist seemed to shift unnaturally, almost as though something moved within it. Tyler nudged her gently. "Hey, it's okay. I'll go right behind you. If something grabs us, it'll get me first." "That's supposed to make me feel better," Alice whispered. But she managed a weak smile before stepping onto the stairs. The descent was longer than expected. The farther they went, the more the temperature dropped. The damp air smelled earthy, tinged with decay, and the walls grew closer together, forcing them to walk single file. By the time they reached the bottom, their breaths were visible in the cold. The space opened into a cavernous room, its high ceilings lost in shadows. Chains hung from above, swaying gently as though stirred by an unseen breeze. Rusted lanterns dotted the walls, their flickering light casting grotesque shapes across the stone floor. In the center of the room stood an ornate wooden door, its surface carved with twisted faces frozen in silent screams. "That's unsettling," Mike said, studying the door. "No kidding," Rachel agreed. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers over one of the carvings. "Look at the detail. Whoever designed this place has some serious issues." "It's all part of the show," Sean said dismissively. "They're just trying to psych us out. Nothing we can't handle." But as he reached for the door handle, a loud clang echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of metal scraping against stone. The group froze, heads snapping toward the source of the noise. On the far side of the room, a large iron gate had slammed shut, sealing off the staircase they'd just descended. "Okay, that's not cool," Tyler muttered, glancing nervously at the others. "What if someone gets hurt? How are we supposed to leave?" Rachel tried to sound calm, but her voice wavered. "It's part of the experience. They'll let us out when it's over. Right, Sean?" "Of course," Sean said, though his confidence seemed slightly shaken. "Let's keep moving." He turned the handle, and the door creaked open to reveal another corridor. This one was lined with old, dusty portraits. Each frame held an oil painting of a grim-faced individual, their eyes cold and unwelcoming. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by a tattered red carpet that ran the length of the hall. "These are weirdly realistic," Alice murmured, pausing to study one of the paintings. It depicted a pale woman in a black dress, her thin lips pressed into a hard line. Her eyes seemed to follow Alice no matter where she stood. "They probably installed tiny cameras behind the eyes," Mike said, leaning in to inspect another portrait. "Classic trick. They use them in escape rooms all the time." "Yeah, but this doesn't feel like a trick," Alice whispered, her voice barely audible. "It feels wrong." Suddenly, Tyler let out a sharp gasp. "Did that one just blink?" Everyone turned to look at him, then at the painting he was pointing to, a stern-looking man in a military uniform. His cold blue eyes stared back at them, unchanging. "Dude, you're imagining things," Sean said, though he quickened his pace down the hallway. But as they continued, the paintings seemed to shift subtly. Smiles curled into sneers. Neutral expressions twisted into glares. Shadows in the corners of the frames grew darker, deeper, until they looked more like voids than canvas. The group pressed forward, their unease growing with each step. The corridor seemed endless, the portraits blurring together into a gallery of malice. The faint sound of footsteps echoed behind them, though no one dared to look back. Finally, they reached another door. This one was simple and unmarked, its surface smooth and unadorned. Sean grabbed the handle without hesitation, but it wouldn't budge. "Locked?" Rachel asked. "Doesn't feel like it," Sean replied, yanking harder. "It's stuck." "Let me try," Mike said, stepping forward. As he gripped the handle, a low growl reverberated through the hall. Did anyone else hear that?" Tyler stammered. The growl came again, louder this time, echoing from somewhere behind them. It was deep and guttural, like an animal, but no animal they could recognize. Alice clutched Tyler's arm. "We're not alone," Sean banged on the door. "Hey, if this is part of your show, it's not funny. Open the damn door." The growling grew closer, accompanied by the sound of claws scraping against the stone floor. Rachel spun around, her eyes darting wildly down the hallway. "It's coming," she whispered. "What is?" Tyler asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Rachel replied, her bravado completely gone. "But it's close." A shadow flickered at the far end of the hall, too large and too fast to be human. The growling became a roar, shaking the walls and rattling the portraits in their frames. Mike and Sean threw their combined weight against the door, and with a loud crack, it burst open. They tumbled through, pulling the others in after them. As soon as they were inside, the door slammed shut on its own, sealing them in darkness. The growl cut off abruptly, replaced by a suffocating silence. "Is everyone okay?" Sean asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Define okay," Tyler muttered, his breathing ragged. Rachel fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a small, empty room with no visible exit. The walls were bare stone, damp and streaked with dark stains. "Where the hell are we?" Mike asked, running a hand along the wall. Sean's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But whatever that thing was, it's out there, and we're in here." For now, the room seemed to pulse with an oppressive energy, each second stretching unbearably. The light from Rachel's phone trembled as her hand shook, casting jittery shadows on the slick stone walls. Tyler sank to the floor, his back pressed against the wall, as if willing it to swallow him whole. "Okay," Rachel said, her voice louder than she intended. "We need a plan. We can't just sit here." "No kidding," Sean snapped, pacing the room. "But in case you didn't notice, there's no door. Unless one of you has a sledgehammer hidden somewhere, we're stuck." Mike, ever the pragmatist, started inspecting the walls, running his hands over the damp stone. "There's always a way out. Places like this are designed to disorient you, but they don't actually trap you. It's against the law or something." Alice huddled in a corner, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. That growling. It wasn't fake. You all heard it, right? Something's in here with us. "Shut up, Alice," Sean snapped. "You're not helping." Tyler glared at him. "Lay off, Sean. She's just scared. We all are. I'm not scared, Sean retorted, though the edge in his voice suggested otherwise. Rachel sighed. Could you two save the macho crap for later? We need to figure out how to... She stopped mid-sentence, her light catching something carved into the wall. What's this? The others gathered around as Rachel illuminated the markings. At first glance, they looked like more runes, similar to the ones in the hallway, but upon closer inspection, they realized they weren't runes at all. They were scratches, deep, jagged gouges in the stone, forming crude, childlike drawings. One depicted a figure standing over what looked like a coffin, their face twisted into an unnatural grin. Another showed a group of smaller figures surrounding a central one, their hands outstretched as if reaching for it. What the hell is this? Mike muttered, tracing the grooves with his fingertips. It's a story, Alice whispered. She didn't need to be close to see the carvings. She could feel them, their meaning pressing against her mind. Something is trying to tell us something. Sean scoffed. Great. We're trapped in a haunted house with arts and crafts hour. Shut up, Sean, Rachel hissed. She's right. Look at the progression. Rachel shined her light farther down the wall, revealing more drawings. In the last one, the central figure was gone, replaced by a single jagged line stretching across the entire width of the wall, as though it had been violently scratched into the stone. I don't like this, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. None of them noticed the room growing colder, the air becoming heavy with the stench of decay. A soft, scratching sound echoed from the opposite wall. Alice gasped, clutching Tyler's arm. Did you hear that? Sean spun around. It's nothing, just the place settling. Old houses make noise. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, like claws raking across stone. Tyler scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with panic. That's not settling, dude. That's something trying to get in. The wall trembled, the scratches growing into a deafening cacophony. Cracks spread across the stone, splitting it like a spider's web. Move! Sean shouted, pulling Rachel away just as the wall gave way with a thunderous crash. For a moment, all they could see was dust and rubble. Then the mist poured in, thick and choking, swirling like a living thing. Shapes moved within it, indistinct but undeniably there. What is that? Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a figure emerged from the mist. It was humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes glowed faintly, pale and empty, like twin moons shrouded in fog. Alice's scream pierced the air. Sean grabbed her arm, yanking her back. Run! Now! They bolted toward the far end of the room, the creature's heavy footsteps echoing behind them. The mist thickened, blurring the edges of the space, making it impossible to tell where the walls ended and the floor began. This way! Mike shouted, spotting a narrow passageway that hadn't been there before. They barreled through the opening, the stone scraping their arms and legs as they squeezed through. The passage twisted and turned, a labyrinth of jagged corridors. The growls and scraping noises followed, always just a step behind. Keep moving, Sean barked, his voice hoarse. Finally, the passage widened, opening into another chamber. This one was circular, its walls lined with flickering torches. In the center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a single black mirror. The glass was cracked, its surface rippling like water. What now? Rachel gasped, clutching her side. Sean pointed to the mirror. Maybe that's the way out. Or a trap, Mike countered. We don't have a choice, Sean said, stepping toward the pedestal. As he reached for the mirror, the air in the room shifted. The torches dimmed, their flames sputtering, and a low hum filled the space. The mirror rippled, and then something moved within it. The group froze, watching as the surface of the mirror twisted, reshaping itself into a face. It was pale and skeletal, its empty eye sockets staring directly at them. "You do not belong here," the voice rasped, hollow and echoing. "But you have come, and now you cannot leave." Alice backed away, shaking her head. No, this isn't happening." The face turned toward her, its cracked lips curling into a ghastly smile. "Oh, but it is." Suddenly hands shot out of the mirror, black, gnarled and impossibly long. They snatched at Sean, wrapping around his arm and pulling him toward the glass. "Help me," he shouted, struggling against the grip. The others hesitated, paralyzed by fear, but Rachel lunged forward, grabbing Sean's other arm. "I've got you. Pull!" The mirror pulsed, the hands tightening their grip. Sean's screams echoed as he was dragged closer, his body halfway inside the glass. With a final, desperate scream, he disappeared, the surface of the mirror smoothing as though he'd never been there. "No!" Rachel screamed, pounding on the glass. "Bring him back!" The mirror remained silent, its surface still. Behind them, the growls returned, louder and more feral. "Run!" Mike said, his voice shaking. "We need to run!" For once, no one argued. The group tore down the corridor, their panicked footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. Rachel ran ahead, her face pale and streaked with tears. She couldn't shake the image of Sean being pulled into the mirror, his screams still ringing in her ears. "This isn't real," she whispered to herself as she ran. "It can't be real." Behind her, Tyler stumbled, clutching the wall for balance. "Slow down!" he shouted. "I can't!" A growl ripped through the air, deep and guttural, freezing them in place. The sound came from the passage they had just left, growing louder, closer. "Move!" Rachel snapped, grabbing Tyler by the arm and pulling him forward. They emerged into another room, this one larger than the last. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper. The design faded into unrecognizable patterns. A single chandelier dangled from the high ceiling, its crystals shattered and hanging by threads of rusted wire. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. Rachel turned, grabbing the handle and yanking it with all her strength. It didn't budge. "We're trapped again," she cried. Mike scanned the room, his breathing ragged. "There has to be another way out." Tyler pointed to a narrow staircase spiraling upward in the corner. "There, stairs. Let's go." "Wait," Alice whispered, her eyes fixed on something in the center of the room. The others followed her gaze. In the middle of the room was an old armchair, its fabric torn and rotted. Seated in it was a figure, a man, slumped forward with his head hanging low. "Is he alive?" Tyler asked, his voice trembling. Rachel edged closer, her phone's flashlight shaking in her grip. She aimed the beam at the man's face, and her stomach lurched. The man's skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken and lifeless. His mouth hung open, revealing blackened teeth. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, as though it had been snapped. "He's dead," Rachel whispered, stepping back. "No," Alice said, shaking her head. "Something's wrong. He's moving." The man's chest rose and fell in shallow, jerky movements. His fingers twitched, clawing at the armrests of the chair. "Get back!" Mike shouted, pulling Rachel away. The man's head snapped up with a sickening crack, his hollow eyes locking onto Tyler. A guttural growl erupted from his throat as he lunged forward, faster than any of them could react. Tyler screamed, stumbling backward and falling to the floor. The man pounced, his bony fingers wrapping around Tyler's throat. "Help me!" Tyler choked, clawing at the man's hands. Rachel grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor and swung it with all her strength, striking the man in the head. The impact sent him reeling, but he didn't release his grip on Tyler. Instead, he turned toward Rachel, his face contorted in rage. "He's not human!" Alice screamed, backing into a corner. "Stop standing there!" Rachel shouted at Mike, who was frozen in place. "Do something!" Mike snapped out of his trance and grabbed the nearest object. a rusted candelabra from a side table. He swung it at the man's back, the force of the blow finally knocking him off Tyler. The man fell to the ground, writhing and snarling like a wounded animal. "Get up!" Rachel yelled, pulling Tyler to his feet. They bolted for the staircase, scrambling up the narrow steps 2 at a time. The growling grew louder behind them, and when Rachel glanced back, she saw the man crawling after them, his twisted body moving with unnatural speed. The staircase led to a narrow hallway, its walls lined with cracked mirrors. The group barreled through, their reflections distorted and fragmented in the glass. Tyler was gasping for air, his hand clutching his throat where the man's fingers had left dark, bruise-like marks. "We can't keep running like this," he wheezed. "That thing, whatever it is, it's not going to stop." Mike nodded, his face pale. "We need to find a way out, fast." Alice pointed to the end of the hallway, where a wooden door stood slightly ajar. "There, that has to lead somewhere." They rushed toward the door, shoving it open and spilling into the next room. It was a parlor, dimly lit by a single candle burning on a mantel. The furniture was covered in dust, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. In the center of the room stood an ornate grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging rhythmically. "Are we safe?" Alice whispered, clutching her sweater. Rachel shook her head. "We're never safe. Not here." As if to prove her point, the clock began to chime. The sound was low and mournful, echoing unnaturally in the confined space. With each chime, the room grew colder, the candle's flame flickering wildly. "What's happening?" Tyler asked, backing away from the clock. The pendulum stopped mid-swing, and the clock's face cracked, splintering outward. From the center of the clock, black smoke began to pour, filling the room with its suffocating presence. "Run!" Mike shouted, grabbing Alice's arm, but the smoke moved faster than they could. It coiled around Tyler, lifting him off the ground as he screamed in terror. "Help me!" he cried, his voice muffled by the choking fog. Rachel grabbed his arm, pulling with all her strength, but the smoke was too strong. It wrapped around Tyler like living chains, dragging him toward the shattered clock. "No! No!" Tyler's screams echoed as the smoke engulfed him completely. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the smoke vanished, taking Tyler with it. The room fell silent. The candle on the mantel flickered weakly, its light barely illuminating the stunned faces of the remaining 3. "He's gone," Alice whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel sank to her knees, her hands shaking. "This is my fault. I should have held on." "There was nothing you could do," Mike said, though his own voice was unsteady. "Whatever this place is, it's not normal." Alice looked at the shattered clock, her eyes wide with fear. "It's alive. This whole house. It's alive, and it's hunting us." The silence was broken by a faint, echoing sound. A voice, distant but unmistakable. It was Tyler. Tyler's voice echoed faintly through the parlor, distorted and ethereal. "Help me, please." The sound sent a chill down Rachel's spine. She looked toward the shattered grandfather clock, half expecting to see Tyler emerge from the jagged remains. Instead, only silence and the faint sway of the clock's broken pendulum greeted her. "That's not him," Mike said firmly, his voice cracking. "It's this house. It's trying to mess with us." Alice clutched her arms tightly, her eyes darting around the room. "What if it is him? What if he's still alive?" Rachel stood, her legs shaky. "We can't just leave him if there's a chance." "There's no chance," Mike interrupted, stepping in front of her. "You saw what happened. Tyler's gone. We need to focus on finding a way out before we end up like him." Rachel glared at him but said nothing. He was right, even if she hated to admit it. The 3 of them moved cautiously through a door at the back of the parlor, entering another hallway. This one was narrower, the walls covered in faded floral wallpaper that peeled at the edges. The air was damp and carried the faint scent of rot. The whispers returned, louder this time, weaving between their footsteps like an unseen presence. "Keep going," Mike urged, though his own hands trembled as he held the flashlight. As they walked, the wallpaper changed, shifting from faded flowers to crude drawings scratched into the walls. The figures were more detailed than before, their faces twisted into expressions of pain and anger. Some seemed to watch the group as they passed, their hollow eyes following their every move. Rachel paused in front of one particular drawing. It depicted a group of people, 5 figures surrounded by dark shapes. "Does this look familiar?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike leaned closer, his flashlight illuminating the crude etchings. His stomach twisted. The 5 figures in the drawing were positioned exactly as their group had been earlier in the night. "It's us," he said, his voice hollow. Alice backed away, her breathing shallow. No, it can't be. This place, this house, it's inside our heads." Rachel shuddered. "It's not just in our heads. It's been watching us this whole time." They pressed on, the hallway opening into another room. This one was smaller, lined with dusty shelves filled with books and jars. Cobwebs hung thickly in the corners, and the dim light of a single candle flickered on a desk in the center. Mike picked up one of the jars, holding it up to the light. Inside was a murky liquid, and floating within it was something unidentifiable, something that looked disturbingly like an eyeball. "Gross," Rachel muttered, wrinkling her nose. Alice's gaze was drawn to the desk. Resting on it was an old leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and faded, its edges frayed. "Look at this," she said, reaching for it. Mike grabbed her wrist, stopping her. "Don't touch it. Who knows what it is?" "It might have answers," Alice shot back, pulling her hand free. "Don't you want to know what's happening?" Before he could protest further, she opened the journal. The pages were yellowed and covered in spidery handwriting, the ink smudged in places. The first few entries were mundane, detailing the life of a man named Thomas Grayson, who had once owned the Manor. But as Alice flipped through the pages, the tone of the entries changed. "They whisper to me at night," she read aloud. "Voices in the walls, calling my name. They say they are trapped, that they need my help, but their help comes at a price." Rachel frowned. "What price?" Alice turned the page, her hands trembling. "The voices demand tribute. They hunger for fear, for pain. They say the house must be fed." Mike stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "What does that mean? Fed how?" Alice didn't answer, her eyes scanning the rest of the journal. She flipped to the final entry, the writing jagged and frantic. "I have made a terrible mistake. The house is alive, a living thing that feeds on the souls of the fearful. It promised me immortality, but now I am trapped within its walls, a prisoner of my own creation. To those who find this, leave while you can. The house will not let you go easily." The candle on the desk flickered violently, the flame stretching unnaturally high before extinguishing itself. The room was plunged into darkness. Alice gasped as something cold brushed against her arm. "Mike! Rachel! Over here!" Rachel called, her voice shaky. Mike fumbled with the flashlight, finally managing to turn it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the empty room. "What touched me?" Alice whispered, backing against the desk. Mike shook his head. "It's just your imagination. Let's keep moving." But before they could leave, the shelves began to shake violently. Books and jars tumbled to the floor, shattering and spilling their contents. The air grew thick, oppressive, as a low hum vibrated through the room. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a woman, her form translucent and flickering, as though caught between worlds. Her face was twisted in anguish, her eyes hollow and black. "You shouldn't be here," the figure hissed, her voice a chilling echo. The group froze, their breath catching in their throats. "We're sorry," Alice stammered. "We didn't mean to." "Leave," the woman growled, her voice rising to a deafening roar. "Leave, or it will take you too." Before they could respond, the figure lunged at them, her hands outstretched. The room filled with a blinding light, and then they were back in the hallway, gasping for air. The journal was gone, the doorway to the study sealed behind them. What just happened?" Rachel asked, her voice shaking. Alice shook her head. "I don't know, but she was trying to warn us." "Warn us about what?" Mike snapped. Alice met his gaze, her eyes filled with fear. "About what's coming." The hallway stretched endlessly before them, its oppressive silence broken only by the echo of their footsteps. Rachel's flashlight flickered, the light growing weaker with every step. The air was heavy, the stench of rot clinging to their lungs. Mike gritted his teeth, gripping the broken candelabra like a weapon. "This place isn't just haunted, it's a trap. It doesn't want us to leave." "It's not a place," Alice whispered, clutching her arms as if to shield herself from the malevolent energy pressing down on them. "It's alive, and it's watching us." "We can't stop now," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We have to keep moving. There has to be an exit." Alice nodded hesitantly, but her gaze kept darting back to the shadows. They pressed forward until the hallway opened into a massive chamber. The floor was uneven, the stones cracked and jagged. A large circular symbol was etched into the ground, its intricate design glowing faintly with a sickly green light. Surrounding the circle were piles of debris, broken furniture, shattered mirrors, and what looked disturbingly like human bones. In the center of the circle stood a figure. "Sean?" Rachel breathed, stepping forward. The figure turned slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was Sean, but his face was pale and hollow, his eyes devoid of life. He smiled, his lips curling into something too wide to be human. "Sean, it's us," Rachel said cautiously. "We're going to get out of here, okay? Come with us." Sean laughed, a chilling, guttural sound that didn't belong to him. "Out," he rasped. "There is no out. Not for me. Not for you." Rachel froze, her blood running cold. Alice backed away, her voice trembling. "That's not Sean. It's the house." Sean's body convulsed, his limbs twisting grotesquely as he stepped out of the circle. The air around him seemed to ripple, growing darker and heavier. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled, his voice layered with something inhuman. "You fed it. You gave it what it wanted. Fear, pain, death." Mike stepped forward, raising the candelabra like a weapon. "We're not afraid of you." Sean tilted his head, his smile widening. "Aren't you?" Without warning, he lunged at Mike, moving with impossible speed. The force of the impact sent Mike crashing to the ground, the candelabra clattering out of his hand. Rachel screamed, grabbing a jagged piece of debris and swinging it at Sean. The blow struck his shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. Instead, he turned to her, his hollow eyes burning with malice. "You can't fight it," Sean said, his voice a distorted whisper. "You're already part of it. You've always been part of it." Alice grabbed Mike's arm, helping him to his feet. "We need to destroy the circle," she said, her voice frantic. "It's feeding the house. If we break it, it'll let us go?" Mike asked, clutching his ribs. "I don't know," Alice admitted, "but it's our only chance." Rachel nodded, her grip tightening on the jagged debris. "Then let's do it." The three of them rushed toward the glowing circle, their movements frantic. Alice grabbed a large piece of stone and slammed it into the ground, cracking one of the etched lines. Mike followed suit, using the candelabra to chip away at the glowing markings. The room shook violently, a deafening roar echoing through the chamber. The air grew colder, the green light of the circle flickering erratically. Sean, or whatever was controlling him, let out a guttural scream. his body convulsing as the circle began to break apart. The walls of the chamber cracked, the ceiling splitting open to reveal a swirling void of black and green light. The roar of the house grew louder, a cacophony of rage and desperation. "It's working!" Alice shouted over the noise. Rachel drove her makeshift weapon into the ground, shattering another section of the circle. The glow dimmed further, the symbols fading into the cracked stone. Sean dropped to his knees, his body shaking violently. For a brief moment his eyes cleared and his voice returned to normal. "Rachel, help me." She froze, her weapon hovering above the final line of the circle. "Rachel, don't!" Alice screamed. "It's not him!" Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she looked into Sean's pleading eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, bringing the weapon down with all her strength. The final line shattered, and the room erupted in a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The glowing circle was gone, replaced by a jagged pit that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. Sean's body lay motionless on the ground, his face peaceful, as if he were finally free. Rachel collapsed to her knees, sobbing, "I'm so sorry." Mike placed a hand on her shoulder, his own face pale and drawn. "You did what you had to." Alice stared at the pit, her expression hollow. "Is it over?" Before anyone could answer, the pit began to pulse, a faint green glow emanating from its depths. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low, rumbling laugh echoed through the chamber. "It's not over," Alice whispered, her voice trembling. The walls began to close in, the air growing thick and suffocating. "Run!" Mike shouted, pulling Rachel to her feet. The three of them sprinted through the collapsing chamber, the laughter growing louder behind them. They stumbled into the hallway, which twisted and warped around them, the walls shifting like living flesh. Somehow, they found themselves back in the parlor. The shattered grandfather clock stood silent, its pendulum still. The front door was open, revealing the faint glow of moonlight outside. "There!" Alice cried, racing toward the door. They burst into the cool night air, collapsing onto the grass outside. For a moment, all they could do was breathe. The oppressive weight of the house finally lifted. Rachel looked back at the manor. Its windows were dark, the house eerily silent. But deep within, she swore she could still hear the faint sound of laughter. As the three survivors walked away, the house loomed behind them, its presence etched into their minds. None of them spoke, but they all knew the truth. They hadn't escaped. The house had let them go, and it was only a matter of time before it called them back.